I think it's still morning. Good morning, at least where we are, by another 30 minutes. It's good to be with everybody on another edition of Terra Firma Live. Um, we will give folks another minute or so to join, and then we'll get into the program. While we're doing that, Kevin, Claire, how y'all doing on this fine Friday, late morning, early midday hour?
Doing good. I got to go pumpkin picking this week, so I got in my stereotypical fall activity.
Okay.
Do one at least once every October. So this year was pumpkin picking, but it was
Where'd
great.
you, where'd you
It
go?
was Sarah's Pumpkin Patch out in Orange, Virginia.
Okay.
Um, it was nice because it was small. Because there's one I used to go to in Harrisonburg. I mean, but there's just hundreds of people at that place all the time, and this place had like maybe six people max, and then they had two goats that you could pet. So pretty fun.
You just threw that in all casually. A
Yep,
couple of goats to
couple
pet.
goats.
Um,
It's not pumpkin picking unless there's animals.
I suppose I'm good with just getting the pumpkin and leaving.
And leaving.
Trying to remember where we went last fall. I don't know if it was just entirely pumpkin picking, but it was like fall
Mhm.
immersion. I think we went to Smith Mountain. Is that the place with the orchard, the Big Apple Orchard?
Yep.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, we did that, and that was a lot of fun. And I will say, apple cider donuts, all that,
Mm,
all that.
so good.
Yeah. Kevin, how are you doing? What's going on in your world?
Honestly, I am feeling pretty solid. It's been a very quiet week here on the eastern side of town, and I'm kind of relishing, a little bit of I don't know. I feel like there's been like minimal distractions, and that's been welcome, a welcome, productive fall week.
That's cool. There's something to be said for a quiet week that allows you to do whatever it is you need to do mentally, physically, just with a less demanding calendar. I don't know about you all, but the calendar sometimes is winning, and it's good to have a week where you can be a little bit more in control of it, a little bit
I don't
more.
know if I was more control of it, but it was like literally very quiet.
Well, I'm gonna leave that one alone then and keep it moving. That's hilarious. All right. Well, if you just tuned in, we are talking all things fall, goats, quiet, pumpkins, and apple cider donuts as our preamble to a hopefully really interesting conversation around really going further in this dialogue around assumptions. Last week, Breland and I had a chance to talk about assumptions and how it shows up in our understanding of our markets and our communities and our organizations. And we're going to take that conversation a little bit deeper today and really dive into how they impact the way we show up and perceive others, especially in the context of work. And we're going to do that once again through another customer story that involves working with a management consulting firm who is exploring imposter syndrome in their organization. And we'll get to that in a few. But before we do, maybe just to kind of see where you all are at on this topic and how you perceive it, have you ever felt like an imposter? Kevin, you first.
I think so. Like, I reflect on my time in grad school, and I remember, especially in that like first semester, trying to make sense of who I thought I needed to be, who I was, and how that experience was different from the undergraduate experience, and just trying to acclimate, I suppose. And there was a period where I kind of felt like maybe I should just fake it until I make it, and then eventually I'll get to a point where I've made it, and then I'll be past that imposter phase.
Mm. Claire, what's your take? Have you ever felt like an imposter?
Oh yeah. I mean, for sure. I mean, I graduated with a biology background in veterinary science, and now I'm in a business role, which was not where I thought I would be just a few years ago. So there's always been thoughts of like, how am I here? How did I get here? Did I take the spot of someone else more deserving of this role? But it is definitely a common feeling I've learned, and I've learned to manage it over time. I think I'm definitely at a better place than I was a few years ago. But for me, the biggest factor is having confidence in myself and being like, no, like I'm here for a reason and I'm doing a good job. And so, yeah.
You both already hit like some of the biggest points in this dialogue around, you know, how we navigate like the fake it till you make it strategy, which by the way is a very, very viable strategy. You know, this questioning of like, am I in the right place? And am I supposed to be here? And then building your own confidence. Like you all are already like jumping into the deep end of this pool. And I would say I have very often at different stages of my life felt like the imposter. And, you know, for me, it was, and you know, when you look at sort of the definition of imposter syndrome, there's a few different ones, but one of them that really resonated with me was this notion of, you know, when you feel or believe that you are not capable of or able or ready to do a given job, despite all evidence to the contrary, despite the actual facts that you are trained, capable, ready, knowledgeable to do it. The belief, the self belief that, yeah, I'm not ready for this, even though objectively you are. And so that causes this dissonance that says, you know, if I do this thing that I don't believe I'm ready for, I will be exposed. And then, you know, then the house of cards comes crashing down because everybody will know we knew he wasn't ready for that. We knew he didn't know what he was doing. We knew he was making this up. And so I felt that way at many stages in life and career. I will say I have found that they have more often coincided with doing things that by definition were out of my comfort zone, things I either didn't want to do but was sort of, you know, pushed into, or things that I did want to do but was definitely scared of. And I feel like sometimes that's when the tension comes up because you're like, why am I doing this to myself? I could just go do something else that's easier and less imposter syndrome inducing. So I don't know if that resonates with you too, but both strike me as individuals who are, you push yourselves to try new things and different things. There's a lot of courage in that, but I think also comes along with the fear of what if people find out that I don't know what I'm doing, even if that's not true. Is that, please riff on that. Is that
I don't think anybody feels like an imposter when they're comfortable. It's precisely when you're uncomfortable, you're doing something new, you're challenging yourself, you're growing in some way. And by virtue of that growth, there's some element that kind of pushes you, I suppose, to feel different. And that different feeling, that newness might be what kind of like brings that imposter effect to the forefront of the mind. Like, oh, this is like precisely because it's uncomfortable, precisely because it's new or novel.
Claire, anything you want to add to that?
I mean, yeah, I think one thing for me is, again, being in a different field, even if it is comfortable, even if I feel like I am doing a good job, then I'm like, but should I be doing something different because I thought I was going to be doing that a few years ago? Like, if I'm comfortable in this job, for me, it leads to some uncomfortableness because, like, well, then what was I doing a few years ago? Maybe I should have been doing that then. So it feels like you can't get away from it, even if you try. But, yeah.
Another quick reference as I'm looking up on my phone some definitions, you know, another frame from National Institutes of Health. Imposter syndrome is a behavioral health phenomenon described as self-doubt of intellect, skills, or accomplishments among high achieving individuals. So, Kevin, we're not necessarily, if we're comfortable or maybe not achieving the things we aspire to achieve, is probably less likely or maybe not even, I won't say not possible, but not prevalent, and it shows up in those moments when in fact we are trying to achieve something, to make a difference, to try something for ourselves or our team or others around us. Um, so with that, let's get into this story that we experienced with one of our customers. And as you know by now, we don't name our customers because we want to keep the focus on what we learned with them and what they learned and what it means for you. And that's easier to do when you're not distracted by who they are and what you think is going on in their business. So this was a management consulting firm. And as I alluded to last week, this exposed some of my own biases around what imposter syndrome was, because our key contact, our customer, when he reached out and said he wanted to do a project on imposter syndrome, I was like, oh, cool, that's interesting. And he said, because, my hypothesis is, almost all of us have experienced it at some point or another. And I was like, ooh, I'm almost embarrassed to say it now, but at the time I was like, that's not imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is when, you come from a background or an experience or lived experience, and those social and societal factors that have made it hard for you to get to where you want to get to are part of the reason why you feel like you don't have the skills or the accomplishments or the abilities to do the job. How could everybody have that feeling? And I'm not saying even today that I think that everybody has that feeling the same. I do think our backgrounds and our experiences can make that a more significant part of our lives, or maybe less. Privilege can play a role into it. I think privilege gives us different tools to navigate imposter syndrome that some of us don't have. Um, but when I heard that, I was like, wow, okay. So it was interesting though, because it was a chance for me to learn something fundamentally different about this topic than my preconceived notion and my assumptions. And so in this project, the premise, if you will, was that as a management consulting firm, you're often recruiting heavily at the college and MBA level. You're bringing young people in, people who are often starting out their career, and you need them to get really acclimated to the culture of that firm and then the business situations around the client that they're working with, because you're training them to be consultants, to spot problems, understand them, synthesize them, develop recommendations and strategies, and go forward. And if you feel you don't belong in that room, or you don't belong in that meeting, or you don't belong in that face to face with that client because of imposter syndrome, it's going to have an impact not only on your development as an individual, it's going to have an impact on the firm's business, because they are counting on these individuals to come in. They recruit for these high achieving, super smart, tons of leadership experience. They recruit for that. And then they need them to kind of get in and fit in and make an impact. And that wasn't happening necessarily to their desired level. I'm pretty sure it was happening. I just think as a firm with aspirations, they wanted to see it happen faster, or stick more, or make sure that that employee experience was really being developed in a cohesive way and in a positive way, where they weren't sitting there saying, I hate this job because I don't feel like I'm good enough for it, instead of, wow, I am good enough for this job and I belong there.
Mhm.
So we worked with them to focus on relatively new hires over the past, I think, year and change, who had come in through their recruiting program and their orientation program. And we explored their stories about times when they felt like they had experienced imposter syndrome. And some of those, as you might expect, were in the process of working with the firm's clients. Some of those were just interacting with more tenured employees in the firm, or even senior leaders, whether they were the same age or a few years older or a lot older. So age wasn't the only factor. Um, the sort of level of experience or level of responsibility was one, and whether you were dealing with client experiences or organizational ones was another. But it had a lot to do with this sort of exposing feelings of being alone in that journey, of not knowing who I could turn to when things feel overwhelming, when I don't feel like I know what I'm doing, and not wanting to ask for help, because that feeling that asking for help might be perceived as like a weakness, or in fact, yeah, see, they don't know what they're doing. That's why they need help. And so it was a fascinating study where, to their great credit, they not only wanted to hear the experiences of their new associates, they invited some of their more tenured employees to participate. And the part that really blew my mind was when they shared their stories of imposter syndrome and how some of them still felt that way. These were like, by most external measures in the professional sense, these were fairly successful individuals in their career and for the firm. And they were vulnerably talking about the times where they felt like they had experienced imposter syndrome. The big difference in their stories that we could detect when we analyzed them was they had developed skills and tools to overcome those times when they felt paralyzed by imposter syndrome. And that was a huge insight that in that company culture, there was a pathway, there was a way to navigate how to overcome imposter syndrome that seemed to be fairly unique to who they were. And the opportunity was to say, how do we take these experiences of overcoming imposter syndrome, share them so that people don't feel like they're unique in this or they're alone. That was the other thing. Almost everybody who told us that they had experienced imposter syndrome felt like they were the only one in their whole cohort who was feeling it, which is fascinating to me that 60, 70, 80 employees feel that way. And they all thought it was just them. And so I thought, it was a really, really interesting and insightful study. And one of the things we got to do with them in terms of taking those insights and applying them was facilitate a workshop afterwards where some of the participants shared the stories that they had submitted to us in the Seek app. And we facilitated some dialogue around like, so what can you do to overcome this? And how can you build this into the employee experience, into the training programs, into leadership development, into the mentoring and sponsorship programs? And it became very, very active and actionable in terms of the things that they decided they were going to go do to reduce that feeling of being an imposter, especially when dealing with clients. It was one of the more surprising projects for me that we've done with a client, and that's exactly why I loved it, because I learned things that I did not expect to learn, and it challenged my assumptions. And I also came away with some tools for myself, and I was like, oh, okay.
Mm.
And it was a really, really interesting project. And so, Claire, I know that when you took the reins of that project, that was actually your first CCAP project. And I think you were maybe just, by the time when we started it, I think you were only like 3 months on the team. And then by the time we got it off the ground, it was about 4 to 5 months. So I'm just curious, when you think about that project, what was that like for you? Were there things in there that you could relate to? And I'm curious from both angles, both running your first Seek project and then, as a person who was taking a new step in their career, what did you glean from that experience for yourself?
Yeah, it was definitely eye-opening. This was one of the first, even just projects of this type that I had been involved in. But it was really cool seeing everything come together because I know we had been working on CCAP for the past few months that I was there. We were finishing up a different project for the Seek session. So that was also, this is still completely new. And it was first time CCAP was the main platform for story collection. And I think it just went extremely well. It was such a smooth project. People were really excited to share their stories. Everyone was super insightful from employees of all levels. Like you said, I thought it would have been a little different having the two different tenured versus newer college age employees. But it was really cool to see them come together. But I did relate to a lot of what people were saying about their life and their work experiences. And it did make me realize that imposter syndrome is just something that many of us go through, regardless of our level of experience in the career fields. But yeah, I loved it. I thought it was a great project.
Kevin, from your perspective, I'm curious, when you think about this topic and you think about the ways all of us are navigating our identities, navigating wanting to belong on some level to the places we're in or the communities we live in or the companies we work for. How do you think imposter syndrome impacts that or maybe even like interrupts that? I'm just curious what your thought is on that.
I definitely think that when I consider imposter syndrome, and I guess what comes to mind first is like isolation, feeling alone, paralysis, and then like analysis paralysis, kind of like a word association, like free, or, just like those are the things that come up for me initially. And there's a sense of you want to be able to focus your time, energy, and effort and your resources towards whatever the projects are at hand, or, establishing that rapport and collaborating with your team members. But if there's this voice in your head that's nagging you and saying, like, you don't belong here, or, do you really deserve to be in this position? Like, that can really take you out of the present moment and put you into kind of a really like it can put you in a headspace that's really hard to like be productive in, because you're not really able to dive into the work at hand or whatever is in the present moment. You're more so kind of I don't know, you're in a place that it's just difficult to get over yourself. And that might sound kind of harsh, but like, at least in my own experience, like, it's that self overcoming aspect of the imposter syndrome that provides like the biggest hurdle or challenge. And I suppose it interrupts the tasks that are literally at hand, because there is a greater priority or emphasis on like, why am I here? Do I deserve to be here? Am I actually the right person for this role or for this job? When in reality, like, if you're in that place, at least in my own experience, the colleagues that I've worked with and the team members I've worked with aren't so much concerned with how did I get here or how did you get there. They're more concerned with like, how can we connect and develop relationships that allow us to tackle what's at hand as a team, versus, what enabled you to get to this place. I guess that's what comes up for me. Like,
That's powerful. And when you talked about the isolation, that really hit home for me. And when you talked about, you know, why am I here and how did I get here? I heard Claire say some of that as well. That deeper questioning of like, whether you call it deservedness or, you know, did I earn this spot? Is it fair that I'm here? That's where sometimes my imposter syndrome would go to, is like that question of deservedness. And, the irony in this is that there are plenty of people, there are plenty of people out there doing things that you're like, I know they are not more prepared or capable in doing that than I am. But there's something different in their psyche. There's a confidence or an ability. Maybe it's not more confidence. Maybe they've navigated overcoming that self-doubt. And so I'm really curious about that, like how we go through that process of confronting, that doubt. And again, I love the definition. It's despite all evidence to the contrary, right? Just despite all of your collective experience, despite the things you've done, despite the fact that somebody says, oh my gosh, I want you for this role. Like, I think the way you see this is going to bring something different. Despite all that, you're like, I hear what you're saying, but I don't believe it because the belief in my head is stronger. Claire, how has that, like you said, you were going down the biology and veterinary route. Yeah. And then, you said, hey, that sounds like an interesting job, being the project and ops manager for a company called Share More Stories. Like, in that moment, you could have easily said, no, that's not what I trained for. But something in your skill sets, something in your preparation, something in how you show up in the world absolutely qualified you for the position. So how did you get to that point where you agreed that you were more than qualified for the job you needed to do?
Well, because I had worked after I graduated, I worked for a year as a actual manager at a retail company. And I realized through that I was getting a lot of like business experience as well. And I was like, oh, I really actually like this. And I'm also good at it, which makes it enjoyable. But of course, I had my first call and first intro to the company was with Andy. So it wasn't even with you. So it was all the coding part of our company. And I was scared. I almost said no. I was like, I don't even know. But I was like, no, like, let's just keep going. And then I spoke with you and I was like, this seems like a great company. I really want to see where it goes. Jumped in, so scared, did not know what I was doing at first. But I pushed through. And I think for me, it was just continuous learning and self-compassion were my biggest things. Yeah. And so because I realized I was like, yes, people make mistakes. I think that was my biggest thing of realizing in the workplace, nobody's perfect. People have bad days, people make mistakes, and people are always learning. So just because I don't do something right away the first time doesn't mean I'm a fraud, even though that's where my mind goes. It's like, wow, I made a mistake. I messed this up. Why am I doing this? Why shouldn't have tried? And then I was like, no, there's the other side of my brain that's like, it's okay because now you're learning how to do it the second time. Like people aren't expecting you to do things right the very first time you try it, but that's why you try. But the self-compassion has been really, really big of reminding myself like it's okay to keep learning. And then just that's the whole point is learning. If you make a mistake and you walk away, then that's it. But if you apply what you learn to the next time you do it, that's how you improve. So, yeah.
You're reminding me of some of the things that the participants of this project shared because they're like you all are both saying here. Their stories were deep and rich and emotional in terms of like just the things that they were navigating and experiencing. And it, when you hear these stories, you're just like, man, like what are we doing that creates this environment in many people's early and ongoing work experiences. It's not limited to the beginning of people's careers. I mean, go on LinkedIn and people far more qualified, prepared, experienced than I am are sharing the same fears, doubts, lack of self-belief, and more. And it's like, well, what is it that we've created in this sort of this tension between we want to achieve this really challenging goal together, and the individual feeling like I don't belong on the team that wants to climb that mountain. And I just think it's something for us to think about as definitely as a company and an organization, but as communities, as a society, as a culture of work. I want to come back to that fake it till you make it piece for a minute, Kevin, because we did a study in 2019 on the future of work, and it was before obviously the pandemic and everything changed and a lot of people's relationships to work. And also, by the way, a lot of things did not change because we picked up some of the things we put on pause. A few things I think have changed, but that's a different combo for a different day. This notion though of faking it till you make it really jumped out in that conversation too. And we were talking to, again, people from a variety of different work experiences, many of them in mid-stage of their careers. And they were saying the same thing you were saying, Kevin, that I had to be comfortable faking it till I made it because actually I wasn't faking it. I was doing what is normal to do, which is to learn and to project confidence while I'm learning and to be compassionate with myself and wait for some of those details to catch up because it's okay that I don't know everything I'm supposed to know over a 30-year span on day one. And I wrestle with that myself in a lot of contexts. So before we start to wrap up, and just, maybe the last word on that topic of faking it till you make it, like, do you feel good about that, Kevin? Or does that frustrate you? Do you feel like, absolutely, I'm faking it till I make it and I'm proud of it? Or does that sit a little, not sure how you feel about it?
At least at this stage, I'm no longer an adherent of the fake it till you make it strategy for myself.
Okay.
I don't think that that's a strategy that I can adopt because I think it comes to this notion of, this notion of belief, right? I think that there's a lot of myths about the workplace, in the workplace, the myth of perfection, the myth of infinite growth that just don't, match the reality of what it is to be in business, what it is to do a job well, what it is to succeed. And ultimately, I think that there's so much learning that's necessary in whatever role, in whatever position we find ourselves in, that requires us to uh, make mistakes, right? That requires us to fail fast, I think, is like Simon Sinek says, maybe. That requires us to go out on a limb in order for us to be able to make that discovery or to like overcome a certain obstacle or thrive or what
Yeah.
have you. And so like I think that requires like a mindset shift that, at least for me, doesn't allow that. Like I don't think I would be doing myself a service if I had this mentality of, oh, I'm gonna fake it, or I'm gonna try to imitate something that's not really aligned with who I am or what I'm doing. So at least personally, I've kind of like moved away from that. I don't have a nice, catchy rhyming slogan for what I'm trying to do, but I know what it's not.
That's cool. That's very cool. Claire, any parting thoughts before we wrap this up on not being an imposter?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like, especially over the last year here at Share More Stories, we've grown as a team. We've gotten to work with our kinks together. I'll shout out April because she did that Lego workshop with us, which I think that's when it really hit me in the face of, right, I am doing, like, people see me, my coworkers see me as an important cog in this machine that is our company. But I think up until then, I was like, yeah, I mean, I'm doing stuff, but I don't know how important I am. And then I was like, oh, right, this is like we work together. But yeah, I think that was just had popped up earlier. But I think we have come so far as a company, and I'm excited to see where we go together. So
That's awesome. I so appreciate both of you for showing up in your full selves as much as you can every day, as much as you want to every day, and pushing through times of doubt or disbelief, because they will continue to come for all of us, just in life, in work, in community, in relationship. So I'm really, really grateful for everything you both have said. I'm extremely grateful for everything you all have done to teach others of us on this team. It's a lot. It's a lot of teaching each other. As I thought this was going to be a wonderful, beautiful conversation with you both. And so for those of you who've been listening in, we know we ran a couple minutes over, but hopefully it was worth it to you. We'd love to hear from you. You can hit us up in our DMs. You can go to our Share More Stories page and reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. What's your perspective on this topic? And if there's ways we can help you and your organization develop a deeper understanding of people's experiences as employees so that you can make them better, so you can deliver them the kind of solutions that they're looking for, and they can make the kind of impact in your company that you're looking for. Let's talk. I think we can help you. We think we can help you. Thank you all. Have a great day, a great rest of your Friday, and a wonderful weekend. And we'll see you next week.